Good morning. Okay, this will be a quick review over the midpoint and distance formulas. So, say I gave you this segment here and I asked you for its midpoint, which is obviously the point in the middle. First, I would need to find my two coordinates. Let's find my two endpoints. So, this one here, this is negative 2, 3, negative 2, 3, and since this is my first point, I will call that one x1 and y1. It is the x and the y of the first point. My second point here, we do our x's and then our y's, so this point would be 1, negative 2, and I shall call that x2, y2, okay? Sometimes it's given to us on a graph, sometimes they just tell you from the very beginning what your two endpoints are, and you don't have to find the coordinates. But either way, if I want to find the midpoint, my midpoint formula, you want to add up your x's, add x1 plus x2 and divide by 2, and then add up your y's and divide those by 2. So essentially, you are finding the middle of your x's and the middle of your y's. You're finding the average. All right, so my midpoint would be add up my x's, divide by 2, and then add up my y's and divide by 2. That's the general formula here. So, again, if I wanted to find the midpoint of this line segment, I would add x1 plus x2. I'll just set it up here with the blanks, and then I'll fill in the blanks. So my x1 should come first. x1, oh, I put it in the wrong color. But my x1 was negative 2. So negative 2. And then I should have my x2. My x2, so the x coordinate of my second point was 1. All right, then I want my y1. So the y coordinate of my first point was 3. And then add y2, so the y coordinate of my second point was negative 2. And we'll just simplify this. So negative 2 plus 1 is just negative 1, and that was over 2. And 3 plus negative 2, that's like a 3 minus 2, that's a positive 1. So my answer to this would be 1/2 and 1/2. Or if you want to write it with decimals, it could be negative 0.5 and 0.5. But that would be your midpoint. I could look at this and check it if I want to, since I have the graph. Negative 0.5, so negative halfway, and then 0.5, positive 0.5, so halfway up. That would be right there. And that indeed looks like the middle. So that was the midpoint. What about the distance? If I asked you for the distance from one point to the other, how long is the segment is what I'm asking for. The distance formula, distance, you'll just call that D, and it is your x2 minus your x1 squared plus your y2 minus your y1 squared. And it's the square root of all of this. All right? So, again, I like to do it and then just fill in the blanks. Okay? And it's always subtraction in there. And then I will fill in my blanks. I will fill it in with my x2, the x2, so the x coordinate from the second point, which was 1, then the x1, so the x coordinate from the first point, which was negative 2. I know that I already have that minus there. That does not mean that I don't still include that negative 2. And we know that when we subtract a negative, it really makes it a positive. All right, over here, I want my y2. So my y2 was the negative 2. And then the y1 was just a 3. And again, that subtraction sign was already in there. Now I will just simplify this. So we have the square root of 1 plus 2 is 3. So I got a 3 squared plus negative 2 minus 3 When they are the same sign, we actually add them. That would be a negative 5 squared. All right, so that's going to give me a 3 squared is 9. Negative 5 squared, this is always positive because of the parentheses, it's always positive. That's 25. And if I add those up, I'm going to get the square root of 34. If it does not turn into a perfect whole number, when we take the square root, we can just leave it there in the square root. Or if the square root can be simplified, you can go ahead and do that as well. Or depending on if whatever the directions may say, maybe you round it to the nearest tenth. Okay? So that is the midpoint and the distance formula. I've got one more part here that I want to review with you. Let's say I gave you 2 points. Okay, so total different scenario here. Let's say I gave you 2 points, like I told you one of them was the endpoint. So given the endpoint and the midpoint, I want you to find the second endpoint. Find the second endpoint. How should I write that? Given, well, find the second endpoint. All right, so on your classwork, it's going to say, find the other endpoint of the line segment with the given midpoint and endpoint. Same thing. So basically, I'm giving you an endpoint. I'm giving you one of the ends, and I'm giving you the middle. And I want you to tell me what the second end is. Do you understand the scenario? Like, I'll give you the middle. I'll give you the end. And you have to figure out what your other point is. All right? That's the plan. So say I gave you the numbers negative 2, 3, and I gave you a midpoint of negative 9, negative 3. Okay, so since we are referring to the midpoint, I have the midpoint, I want to use the midpoint formula. Again, that midpoint formula was where the middle came from adding up your x's and dividing by 2, and then adding up your y's and dividing by 2. Okay, so from this, say I have the first point. Okay, say I'm given the endpoint is my x1, y1. And my midpoint, I'm going to call that my xm, ym. What I'm looking for is the second point. I'm looking for the x2, y2. Okay, so from this formula, I can take that. I can take that xm equals the middle came from x1 plus x2 divided by 2. All right, that's what I'm going to use. Okay. So xm is x1 plus x2 divided by 2. And similarly, ym is y1 plus y2 divided by 2. All right, those came from the formula that we have. So I'll just plug in what I know to find out what I don't. Right? I know that xm is negative 9. I know that x1 is negative 2. All right, the rest of the formula just says plus x2 divided by 2. So in order to solve for x2, what I would need to do is multiply both sides by 2. Multiply by 2, multiply by 2. So I end up with negative 18. All I have left here is negative 2 plus x2. And so to get x2, I would simply add the 2. So that would cancel. Add the 2. And I end up with a negative 16 equals my x2. Okay? I will do the same thing over here. I have my ym. I know that ym is negative 3. That was my midpoint. The y of my midpoint. y1, I know y1. y1 was given to me. That was the number 3. The rest of the formula, plus y2 divided by 2. Same process. I'm just going to multiply by 2. Multiply by 2. That'll give me negative 6 equals 3 plus y2. And to get y2 alone, in this case, I'm going to have to subtract 3. Subtract 3, so that'll cancel. Negative 6 minus 3 is negative 9. So negative 9 is my y2. So my midpoint is, I'm sorry, not my midpoint, my second point, my second endpoint here is the x's and then the y's. So it's a negative 16, negative 9 would be your final answer. All right, that should be everything you need for today's classwork. So let me know if you have any further questions on Remind.